I'm Ellie and this is Kevin Poulter from Child Child Solicitors.
Hi.
Today we're going to talk about employment law. So let's start at the beginning.
Okay.
So I'm a business owner. What do I need to know about employing people?
Oh, well, I suppose the first big question is whether you actually want an employee or not. Lots of things get talking about now. There are a lot of more people working on a self-employed basis as consultants, or even maybe coming through an agency as maybe workers that don't quite tip over into being employees. So think about really what you need and what your business needs, and whether that's for a very short period of time. Maybe you've got a rush on and you just want some people for maybe 2 weeks or 3 weeks, perhaps running up to Christmas. Do you really want employees for that period, or do you want people to come on an agency type basis? Or maybe even think about friends and family. As a small business particularly, they tend to be slightly more flexible about their employment rights. Okay. So think about whether you want an employee is probably question number one. And then once you think you do want an employee, then how do you want to employ them? Do you need somebody on a full-time basis, or maybe on a part-time for a permanent period, or maybe for a fixed term? So, for example, you've got a big contract in, which again, you know will run for maybe 18 months, 2 years, but after that you don't know what the situation will be. Well, you can employ somebody just for a fixed period of time, and maybe make it sort of contingent, so based around that extra contract that you might have got. Of course, typically most people have an open-ended contract, and they will start work on a certain day, and that until they're terminated for a misconduct reason or redundancy or other things that we probably don't want to talk about too much at the beginning, then you need to start thinking about those sorts of things as well. So think about that, but also think about the obligations that come with employing somebody. So HMRC, you've got to register for tax through the PAYE system. Is that something that you want to be bothered with? And if not, then think about other ways of doing it. National insurance contributions. And then taking on that responsibility, which works both ways. You've got to have a responsibility towards your employees, but they've also got some responsibilities towards you, such as turning up to work. It's pretty obvious, but it's an important thing to do. And if they're not in the position to do that, then again you need to start again. Usually these things happen through conversation, unless you're in an established business which has maybe more established roles, and you know exactly what you're looking to get.
So if I do employ someone, what needs to go into a contract? So obviously I need one, right?
Well, yes. Yes, you do. And you've got a couple of months to do that, but most people will want to have a contract before they start work. They want to know what's expected of them. And there are some obvious things which you'd have to put in there. Names and addresses of the company, but also the employee. They'll want to know how much they're going to get paid. They'll want to know at what time they're supposed to turn up to work. And that doesn't have to be a set time all the time. It can be obviously on shift patterns, or even if we're talking about 0 hours contracts, which we might come on to later, how flexible they need to be, how much notice they might need before a particular shift or a day of work starts. So things like that. Obviously you need to have something about where they're going to work. Will they be working maybe even from home? From an office, a beautiful office like this in the Shard, maybe, who knows? Or from somebody's sort of bedroom or kitchen or sort of outdoor shed. They need to know where they're going to be working. They also need to think about how they will be paid. So will they be paid on a daily basis, on a weekly basis? Most people nowadays are paid monthly, but what day of the month? They need to sort out their mortgage, and they need to sort out their credit card payments, so they need to know what day they're going to get paid. How many hours they're going to work for, how long a day is, how long their holiday entitlement would be, for example.
Very important.
Very important, and there's a minimum around this, which is 28, well, it's actually not 28 days, I think it's 5.6 weeks. So if you're only working 3 days a week, then obviously it's not quite 28 days, it's whatever, 5.6, I think it's 5.6 weeks, I should know that. How many days it will be, but 28 days is, for somebody who's working full-time on a permanent basis, 28 days is what you would expect. And then perhaps more important for businesses is what job they'll be doing. So have a job title, but usually something around more of a description.
So do you have to have a job description?
Well, yes, and now for smaller businesses, for startups even, you probably want to spend some time thinking about that, because you want it to be probably more flexible than a big organisation who has very specific or defined roles. Because if you want to change that role for any reason, then you need to have maybe look at a new contract or rewriting that contract slightly. And again, it's to allow people the flexibility to know, to change the role over time, but also enough definition so that they know what they're meant to be doing.
Yeah.
So chief executive, for example, is a big job to have, and it comes with a whole load of responsibilities, and it's probably not right to list each of those, and most people will have an idea of what that is. Similarly with a cashier in a supermarket, most people have an idea of what that is. But if it's something which is less obvious, spend some time working up a job description, and even that can develop over time as well, and maybe over consultation with the employee who you're looking to bring in. So have a think about things like that, and then additional benefits, if there are any. Pension entitlements. Yeah. Again, we're going to come on to that a little bit later. And then sick pay, things like that, details around compassionate leave. But then also, in a separate document potentially, but also maybe the same thing, to have something around their disciplinary and grievance procedures. So again, it's not something you think about until you start taking people on. But what happens if either you've got a problem with them, or sometimes they've got a problem with you? How does that get resolved? And ACAS is a good place to have a look at, acas.org, possibly .uk, is the website. We could probably tell you this later. But that's a place to start out, ACAS. And they've got some guidelines, they've got some set procedures that people can follow. So you don't necessarily have to create your own, as long as you're doing the minimum which is required, which is detailed there. And then, really, anything else you want to add in. And at this time, it might not be the obvious time, but things to think about, both what they can do outside of work, whilst they're working with you, but also maybe even after they've finished. So these are
what does that mean?
So these are restrictions, sort of in-employment restrictions or post-termination restrictions, restrictive covenants. These are the words that get used.
Sound very scary.
And they can be, and they can be quite onerous. Now, all they can do is to go as far as is required to protect the company.
Okay. Yeah.
So what I can't say is that somebody who's worked at Sage can never work again for a financial services provider.
Yeah.
So it's just or a software manufacturer. It's just too broad, and it completely stops that person from working. But each person here, for example, will work in a very sort of narrow field probably, and they'll have certain people that you probably wouldn't want them to go and start working with.
Yeah.
You probably wouldn't want them, whilst they're working here, to start working on their own behalf in a similar type of business.
Yeah.
So things along those lines, and they can be for a set period of time after the end of employment as well. But again, only as far as is required to protect the business. And again, think about things like geography. There's a real balance to be made here, and if they're too onerous, the courts will just say, well, the too general to us not be relevant. You can't really force somebody to live by those conditions. So for all of these things, and you would expect me to say this, but it's worth getting some advice, and to do that at the start, because you can imagine a situation where somebody works in a small business, let's, for the sake of argument, making cakes, in a particular area, even in a town, and all of a sudden they've had enough of working for you, they want to start their own cake business. Yeah. And they just suddenly sort of open a shop next door and just start selling cakes. Well, everyone that they've been working with has come through you. That's been your hard work and your expense in marketing and everything else. You don't want them to just walk away with that information. So protections around confidential information, around clients, around customers, even suppliers, all needs to be thought about at the beginning. So get some advice, and obviously my details will be available as well.
Absolutely. So moving on from that, if I'm a small business, I've heard of auto-enrolment. What is it? What does it mean? Give me some advice on that.
Okay, well, auto-enrolment is all around the pension. So as everyone knows, the state pension is not as strong as it was. By the time we're old enough, by that stage it'll probably be you have to be 100. By the time of that, there might not be much money around.
Yeah.
So the government's put a responsibility onto employers to take out some pension protections for their employees.
Right. Okay.
Okay. And it doesn't have to be done. It has to be offered.
Yeah.
It's an auto-enrolment. There's the clues in the name.
Yeah.
You're automatically added to the list of all employees are added to this list. But there's an option to opt out for whatever reason if an employee doesn't want to be part of a pension scheme. And it's for people who are earning over £10,000.
Okay.
So it's not a high threshold. It'll cover most people probably. So those earning over £10,000, and everybody, most big businesses already are responsible and they have to auto-enroll people. Small businesses now are starting on there's a very set of staging dates, so they'll be responsible soon. And small businesses by February 2018, I think that's still the date, it's not changed yet, they'll be responsible for making pension contributions to employees certainly who want it. And it won't start as being particularly onerous, maybe as low as 1% of a salary, or whatever they're paid, if they're not paid a salary. But that will potentially develop over time. So they're things to start looking at now and start planning for the future. Most small businesses won't yet have been sort of caught by this in their staging date.
So
take advice.
It's 2018.
Is the last date.
Right, so you've got to set yourself up before.
It's been happening for a couple of years already, it's still happening, and it will happen until that date, but by that stage everybody should be enrolled. And I've got to say, Sage does some good advice around this, some good guidance, and there's something you can download from the website, so again I'm sure
we'll put it into the comments.
Good.
So we've talked about auto-enrolment, we've talked about contracts and getting started, but one of the big things this year is obviously the EU referendum.
Yeah.
So what's happened? What's the changes that have happened due to that EU referendum?
Well, I've not got my crystal ball here yet, I'm afraid, sorry. And the government doesn't know what's going to happen. But there are some things which have sort of happened as a result of the vote already. And I've got to say, there have been various reports around, but EU workers in the UK, which there are a lot of them, in the short term, in anticipation of the changes which will happen. And there's been some news in the over the weekend about maybe having work permits and there may be an American style of system. Point systems have been talked about for people that similarly apply to people outside of the EU already. Okay. But we've got to face facts. There are a lot of people working from the EU already in this country, as there have been maybe for months, years, even decades, who've really built up some expectation to continue here as well. So they need to start thinking about what's going to change. We don't know just yet. From an employment law point of view, well, we can expect some changes. Immigration law, for a start, will change. It will affect who you can bring in and recruit to certain businesses, and how long people need to have been here for, and how much they're going to get paid. All of these things need to develop. But also, other things such as we call transfer of undertaking. We won't go into it now. It's a pretty dull subject, I've got to say, for non-lawyers at least. But it's about sort of when you're sort of buying and selling businesses, and about the employees transferring between them. Outsourcing as well is something that needs to get thought about, and it may well change over time. But in the short term, business as usual. There'll be plenty of advice, plenty of information, and plenty of warning before anything significant changes.
So there's no big significant changes at the moment?
Apart from this worry about employees who are already in businesses potentially leaving, going back home to their original countries, that might be an issue. And from a company point of view, take away employment issues. If you're reliant on EU trade, then it might be that your business is about to suffer as a consequence of what happens in Brexit. And then we're talking about maybe reorganisations, redundancies. The law probably won't change, if at all, certainly not too much. What will change is the makeup and organisation of businesses in the EU, in London, around the country, who maybe use other countries for the bases or just for bringing in employees. So lots of change. Employment law will probably be slowest to change around that.
So what's happened this year in employment law? What's been the big changes, if any?
Well, the big change has been about the national living wage. So it's something that a lot of people are familiar with now. It's gone from a national minimum wage to this living wage, and it's not to be confused with the other living wage, which is the one which is supported by the Living Wage Foundation. Anyway, it's a bit confusing. All you need to know is if people are over 25, they need to be paid a minimum of £7.20 an hour.
Right.
Okay. And you need to think about this, because some people are getting caught out unwittingly, in that this law's come into effect, but they haven't updated salary conditions, for example, hours of work. So people may be working for less than what they're being or should be getting paid, even though there's not been an obvious trigger. So those who are not paid hourly, but paid a salary, look again at that. So that's been a big change, and there's an expectation that living wage will go up to £9 an hour by 2020. So there's some significant movement there, and if you're factoring this into potentially as an issue for employing somebody, think about how much it will cost, not just now, but going forward into the future.
Yeah.
It's not to put people off, and it might well change given a change in government, or certainly a change in Prime Minister. There could be some changes around that. Other things that you need to be thinking about around the gender pay gap. Now again, it's only going to be for big businesses, but for employees particularly, there's going to be an obligation on reporting on the difference between your male and female employees and how much they're getting paid. So that's going to be a big issue. Not for smaller businesses just yet, but we can expect these things to develop over time. And then just everything else that you've heard about, linked to the national living wage. You might have seen recently the naming and shaming of employers who've been caught out, and again sometimes unwittingly, sometimes they're not doing it on purpose. But things that people need to be aware of, and the fines that come along with this now, it's 200% of whatever the discrepancies be.
Wow.
Up to £20,000 per employee.
Per employee.
Per employee. So that's that can be for big businesses particularly. That can be a big responsibility and a huge impact if you're not responsible and not taking that advice at an early stage.
Yeah. So I've got my final question.
Okay.
So if I'm an employer and I want my employees to be on social, to increase my outreach, how do I control that behaviour if they're associated to me and my business?
Well, that's right, and it's this, you hit the nail on the head, it's this association.
Yes.
If people are speaking on your behalf, then it's kind of one thing. If you're using, for example, the Sage email accounts, Twitter accounts, you're obviously speaking on behalf of the business, and you expect certain responsibilities, and most people put this down to common sense. Well, of course you wouldn't do that. Of course you wouldn't put photographs of you up in the on a Friday night after you've been to the pub for a few hours. Of course you wouldn't do that, but people do it, and it's happening more and more often. And this sort of tolerance of common sense is very, very broad. And I would probably say, as an employment lawyer, my common sense is probably different to somebody
of course
who's not an employment lawyer.
Absolutely.
And so if people are speaking on your behalf as your business, then you need to have some guidance in place. You need to have some sort of policy around that. Call it a code of conduct, call it guidelines, call it whatever you want to call it, but have something there which says you shouldn't be doing this. And it's a fluid document. It doesn't have to be rigid. It's not the 10 Commandments. You can have sub-clauses, and you can develop this over time. And as people do things, and we can't anticipate the stupidity of some people, we can't anticipate what they're going to do. And you just need to look at the newspapers every day now of what people are doing on social media. It's outrageous. So having something about that. Now, that's okay if they're speaking on behalf of the company. What about people using it in their own time? And this is a real issue for the law, and for employers particularly. They need to think about how far they can go in controlling what their employees are doing in their own time. Everyone's got a right to a private life. It's one of these our human rights. But if that person's associated with a business through their own fault, through the way that things have operated, then there's that extra responsibility. And the courts and the judges, and even the law to a certain extent, is saying there is a responsibility, there is an association, and it might not be an obvious one. So employers need to be taking care about this and what's being said almost on their behalf by employees in their own time. But also employees need to take some accountability. You can't expect to get dismissed if you're doing something which is wrong. And it's so obviously wrong that no reasonable person would be doing it. But use it as well. It can be a great force. Recruitment. It's being used for recruitment. It's a cheap way of recruiting. LinkedIn particularly now is being used as a way for employees to share jobs that are being offered by their employers. Marketing, building up a profile, essential on social media these days in many organisations. But also things like research and analysis. It's what the competitors are doing. Use it as an opportunity to find out what they're up to. But again, if you're using different accounts, make sure you're checking out the right ones and using the right ones at the right time.
Absolutely.
Because of fat fingers or fat thumbs, that you're pressing things on the wrong accounts, and it's so easy to do on these small phones, or getting bigger phones now. So just taking some care about that. And again, we talked a little bit earlier about restrictions during employment, and also restrictions after employment. People are building up LinkedIn profiles. Who owns those clients? Who owns those customers? You need to think about these from the earliest opportunity, if that's a real risk, an exposed risk to your business. So think about that. Think about.
And if I set up my
passwords.
account, so if I set up my personal account, in work's time and use it for work, do I own it or does work own it?
It's a very good question. And and like every business is different, every situation is different, and every employee is different. And if it's somebody who's nipping to the toilets whilst working, let's say, working in a factory at Sports Direct, well, we know that you shouldn't be going to the toilet for too long previously. So timing that is a separate issue. But people want to use their social media. They will use it as part of the working day. It's become the new fag break. People want to have some time out. So think about how that's factored into it. You're not going to sack everybody for using for updating their Twitter account during the day. If they're doing that too often, if it's affecting productivity, then you can take some action about it. But ownership is a real difficult question, and America's not quite got it right yet, so we usually follow what they do in social media circles. We've got it pretty good, but it doesn't make any difference. What's the impact on the business? That's what we're really looking at. And there are other ways of getting around that. It's not just about how it's used, when it's used, how often it's used. What's the impact on the business, and how can we do something about that? And come and have a chat to me. Contact details are everywhere, so just have a look at Poulter. Poulter. And anyway, enough of the plug-in. And there are things that you can do.
Okay.
You're not hamstrung by this, but equally, don't sack everybody just because they're using Twitter.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.